In this world of wonder and scientific curiosity, a gentle soul would emerge whose quiet observations in a monastery garden would forever change how we understand the very essence of life. This is the story of Gregor Johann Mendel, a man whose patient dedication to understanding nature's secrets would earn him the title of Father of Modern Genetics. Before we dive in, consider subscribing to the channel. Chapter 1. The Seeds of Destiny. On a warm summer day, July 20th, 1822, in the small village of Heinzendorf in what was then the Austrian Empire, a child was born who would one day unlock the fundamental laws governing all life on Earth. The village, now known as Hinchis in the Czech Republic, nestled peacefully in the Moravian-Silesian border region, was home to about 500 souls living simple, agricultural lives. Johann Mendel, as he was christened, entered a world of farming traditions that stretched back generations. His parents, Anton and Rosine Mendel, were German-speaking peasants who had worked the same plot of land for over 130 years. Anton was a dedicated farmer who understood the delicate balance between soil, season, and seed, while Rosine came from a family of gardeners, bringing her own deep knowledge of plants and cultivation. The Mendel farmstead was modest but rich with the wisdom of the earth. Young Johann grew up alongside his two sisters, Veronika, who was older, and Therja, who was younger. From his earliest memories, the rhythms of agricultural life surrounded him. The changing seasons marked not just the passage of time, but the eternal cycle of planting, tending, harvesting, and preparing for the next year's growth. As a small child, Johann showed an unusual fascination with the natural world around him. While other children might play with simple toys, Johann was drawn to the family orchard, where he would spend hours watching his father graft fruit trees. This ancient practice of joining parts of different plants to create new varieties sparked something deep within the young boy's mind. The careful precision required, the patience needed to wait for results, and the marvel of seeing new characteristics emerge from these unions would plant the first seeds of his future scientific pursuits. The village school in Heinzendorf was simple, but Johann was fortunate to have teachers who recognized his exceptional abilities. They noticed how the quiet boy absorbed every lesson about natural science with an intensity that set him apart from his peers. His teachers observed that young Johann possessed not just intelligence, but a particular kind of methodical thinking that would serve him well in years to come. During these formative years, Johann also learned the art of beekeeping from his father, a skill that would remain with him throughout his life. The careful observation required to understand bee behavior, the patience needed to work with these industrious creatures, and the attention to detail necessary for successful hive management all contributed to developing the scientific mindset that would later revolutionize biology. Chapter 2. The Journey Beyond the Village. When Johann reached the age of 11, his exceptional academic abilities had become impossible to ignore. The local schoolmaster, recognizing the boy's remarkable potential, made a recommendation that would change the course of his life forever. He urged Johann's parents to send their son to the secondary school in Troppau, known today as Opava, to continue his education. This decision represented an enormous sacrifice for the Mendel family. As peasant farmers of modest means, they struggled to afford the costs associated with sending their son away to school. The financial burden was particularly challenging because Johann was their only son, and tradition dictated that he should remain on the farm to help with the work and eventually inherit the land. The transition to life in Troppau was difficult for young Johann. Away from the familiar rhythms of farm life and separated from his family, he experienced periods of deep loneliness and homesickness. The academic demands were rigorous, and the financial pressures constant. To help support himself, Johann took on work as a private tutor, teaching other students to earn money for his basic needs. Despite these challenges, Johann excelled in his studies. His teachers at the gymnasium quickly recognized his particular gifts in mathematics and physics. These subjects seemed to resonate with his methodical mind and his natural inclination toward systematic observation and analysis. His academic performance was so outstanding that he graduated with honors in 1840. However, the stress of financial worries and academic pressure began to take its toll on Johann's health. He experienced periods of what would today be recognized as depression, episodes that were so severe he had to temporarily abandon his studies and return home to recover. These difficult periods revealed a pattern that would continue throughout his life. Johann possessed a sensitive nature that made him deeply empathetic, but also vulnerable to emotional strain. During one particularly challenging period, when it seemed that financial pressures might force Johann to abandon his education entirely, his younger sister Verja made a decision that would prove pivotal. Despite being only a young woman herself, she offered to give Johann her entire dowry, the money that was meant to secure her own future and marriage prospects. This extraordinary sacrifice demonstrated the deep bonds of affection within the Mendel family, and Verja's recognition of her brother's exceptional potential. With Verja's financial support, Johann was able to complete his secondary education and move on to the next phase of his academic journey. In 1840, he enrolled in the two-year philosophy program at the Philosophical Institute of the University of Olmütz, now known as Olomouc. Chapter 3. The Scholar's Path. The years at the University of Olmütz marked a crucial period in Johann's intellectual development. The philosophy program exposed him to systematic thinking about the nature of existence, knowledge, and reality itself. More importantly for his future work, he excelled in physics and mathematics, subjects that would provide the foundation for his later scientific approach. During his time at university, Johann supported himself by tutoring other students. This work not only helped him financially, but also deepened his understanding of how to observe, analyze, and explain complex concepts to others. These teaching skills would prove invaluable in his later career as an educator and scientist. However, the financial pressures and academic stress continued to affect Johann's health. He experienced another period of severe depression that forced him to take time off from his studies and return home to recover. These episodes were characterized by what he himself described as bitter food worries and overwhelming anxiety about his future. Despite these setbacks, Johann completed his studies at Olmütz in 1843 with distinction. However, he now faced a critical decision about his future. His father expected him to return home and take over the family farm, as tradition demanded. But Johann's professors and mentors recognized that his exceptional abilities in mathematics and physics could lead to a career in teaching or research. It was at this crossroads that Johann made a decision that would shape not only his own life, but the future of scientific understanding. Rather than returning to the farm or pursuing a traditional academic career, he chose to enter the Augustinian monastery of St. Thomas in Brno. This choice was motivated not by a deep religious calling, but by practical considerations that would allow him to continue his intellectual pursuits. As Johann himself would later write, his circumstances decided my vocational choice. The monastery offered him something that few other institutions could provide, a place where he could continue his education, pursue his scientific interests, and contribute to the intellectual life of the community without the constant worry about financial survival that had plagued his earlier years. Chapter 4. Brother Gregor. In 1843, Johann Mendel crossed the threshold of the Augustinian monastery of St. Thomas in Brno, leaving behind his birth name and taking on the religious name Gregor. This transformation was more than symbolic. It marked the beginning of a new chapter in which his intellectual gifts would find their perfect environment for growth and expression. The monastery of St. Thomas was far from the quiet, contemplative retreat that many might imagine. Instead, it was a vibrant center of learning and intellectual activity. The Augustinian friars who lived there were not merely religious men, but scholars, teachers, and researchers who were actively engaged with the scientific and cultural questions of their time. The monastery possessed an extraordinary library containing thousands of volumes on subjects ranging from theology and philosophy to natural sciences and mathematics. Some of these manuscripts dated back to the 16th century, representing centuries of accumulated knowledge and wisdom. The friars also maintained extensive collections of scientific instruments, botanical specimens, and other materials for research. Perhaps most importantly for Gregor's future work, the monastery maintained extensive gardens, greenhouses, and experimental plots. These spaces were not merely decorative, but served as living laboratories where the friars could study plant biology, test new cultivation techniques, and explore the mysteries of heredity and variation. Brother Gregor threw himself into monastic life with characteristic dedication. He completed his theological studies at the Brunn Theological College and was ordained as a priest in 1847. However, his path within the religious community was not without challenges. When Gregor was assigned to work as a parish priest, visiting the sick and dying in the community, he discovered that he was ill-suited for this aspect of religious life. His sensitive nature and deep empathy made these encounters so emotionally traumatic that he became physically ill. Abbot Cyril Knapp, recognizing Gregor's distress, described him as being seized by an unconquerable timidity when he has to visit a sick bed or to see anyone ill and in pain. Understanding that Brother Gregor's talents lay elsewhere, Abbot Knapp arranged for him to work as a substitute teacher at the secondary school in Znaim. This position proved to be much better suited to Gregor's temperament and abilities. His students found him to be a kind and patient teacher who could explain complex concepts with clarity and enthusiasm. However, when new legislation required all teachers to pass formal certification examinations, Gregor faced another significant challenge. Despite his obvious teaching abilities and deep knowledge, he failed the examination not once, but twice. This failure was not due to lack of knowledge, but rather to the stress and anxiety that had plagued him since his youth. Chapter 5. Student once more. Recognizing that Brother Gregor needed formal training to pass the teaching certification examination, Abbot Knapp made arrangements for him to attend the University of Vienna from 1851 to 1853. This period would prove transformational, providing Gregor with the scientific training and methodological approaches that would later make his groundbreaking research possible. At the University of Vienna, Gregor studied under some of the most distinguished scientists of his time. Most notably, he worked with Christian Doppler, the physicist famous for discovering the Doppler effect. From Doppler, Gregor learned the importance of precise measurement and quantitative analysis in scientific research. This training in mathematical approaches to natural phenomena would later prove crucial when he began analyzing the patterns of inheritance in his pea plants. Gregor also studied chemistry, botany, and the use of microscopes under Franz Unger, a botanist who was an enthusiastic supporter of cell theory and evolutionary ideas. Unger's emphasis on careful observation and systematic experimentation left a lasting impression on his student. The methods and approaches Gregor learned during these 2 years would form the foundation of his later research methodology. Despite this excellent training, Gregor still struggled with the formal examination process. His performance in the classroom remained exemplary, but the pressure of written examinations continued to trigger the anxiety that had troubled him throughout his academic career. After 2 years of study, he returned to the monastery without having completed his certification. However, these years of formal scientific training had not been wasted. Gregor returned to Brno with a sophisticated understanding of scientific methodology, statistical analysis, and experimental design. More importantly, he had developed a clear vision of how to approach the fundamental questions about heredity that had intrigued him since childhood. Back at the monastery, Gregor resumed his teaching duties at the modern school in Brno. Despite not having formal certification, he was recognized as an exceptional educator who brought both enthusiasm and rigorous scientific thinking to his classes. His colleagues and students appreciated his ability to make complex scientific concepts accessible and engaging. Chapter 6: The Gardener Scientist. By the mid-1850s, Brother Gregor had settled into a routine that perfectly balanced his various interests and responsibilities. In addition to his teaching duties, he took on multiple roles within the monastery that allowed him to pursue his scientific interests. One of his most important responsibilities was caring for the monastery's extensive gardens and greenhouse facilities. The greenhouse, built on foundations that can still be seen today, was remarkably advanced for its time. It provided controlled conditions where Gregor could conduct careful experiments with plants throughout the year. Gregor also maintained the monastery's meteorological station, where he made daily observations of temperature, humidity, rainfall, and other weather conditions. This work required the same attention to detail and systematic record-keeping that would characterize his genetic experiments. His meteorological observations were so precise and comprehensive that he became a founding member of the Meteorological Society in Brno. In addition to meteorology, Gregor pursued astronomical observations. The clear nights away from city lights provided excellent conditions for studying the movements of celestial bodies. This work further developed his skills in making precise measurements and maintaining detailed records over long periods. But perhaps most importantly for his legacy, Gregor maintained the monastery's extensive apiary. His work with bees was far more than a simple hobby. It was a sophisticated breeding program aimed at developing more productive honey-producing colonies. He imported bees from various parts of Europe and Africa, studying their characteristics and breeding behaviors. Gregor even invented special mating cages to control which drones mated with the queen bees, allowing him to study inheritance patterns in bee colonies. This work with bees provided Gregor with practical experience in controlled breeding experiments. He learned how to maintain detailed records, how to control mating between different varieties, and how to analyze the characteristics of offspring. All of these skills would prove essential when he began his more famous experiments with pea plants. The monastery's gardens also included extensive fruit orchards, where Gregor continued the grafting work he had learned as a child. He experimented with creating new varieties of fruit trees by combining characteristics from different parent plants. This work deepened his understanding of how traits could be transferred from one generation to the next. Chapter 7: The Great Experiment Begins. In 1856, Brother Gregor embarked on what would become one of the most important scientific experiments in history. His decision to focus on pea plants was not arbitrary, but represented the culmination of careful planning and consideration. Gregor chose pea plants for several practical and scientific reasons. First, peas were easy to grow and could produce multiple generations in a single growing season. Second, pea flowers could be easily controlled for cross-pollination by hand, allowing him to determine exactly which plants bred with which others. Third, peas had several clearly distinct characteristics that could be easily observed and counted. After careful observation, Gregor identified 7 specific traits that appeared in 2 distinct forms. These included seed shape, smooth or wrinkled, seed color, yellow or green, flower color, purple or white, pod shape, inflated or constricted, pod color, green or yellow, flower position, axial or terminal, and plant height, tall or short. The monastery's experimental garden provided the perfect setting for this ambitious project. The 2-hectare plot offered enough space for thousands of plants, while the controlled environment allowed Gregor to carefully manage every aspect of the breeding process. Gregor's approach to this experiment was revolutionary in its systematic nature. Rather than simply observing what happened naturally, he carefully planned crosses between plants with specific characteristics. He maintained meticulous records of every plant, every cross, and every offspring. Most importantly, he counted the results and looked for mathematical patterns in the data. Over the course of 8 years, from 1856 to 1863, Gregor cultivated and studied approximately 28,000 pea plants. The majority of these were carefully bred according to his experimental design, with each cross planned to test specific hypotheses about inheritance. The work was physically demanding and required enormous patience. Each day during the growing season, Gregor would spend hours in the garden, carefully pollinating flowers, recording observations, and tending to his experimental plots. During winter months, he analyzed his data, planned the next season's experiments, and prepared his materials. Chapter 8: Patterns in the Garden. As Brother Gregor's experiments progressed, he began to notice remarkable patterns emerging from his careful observations. When he crossed true breeding plants with different characteristics, the results were not the blended mixture that most scientists of his time expected. Instead, Gregor observed that all the offspring from the first generation displayed only one of the 2 parental traits. For example, when he crossed plants that produced smooth seeds with plants that produced wrinkled seeds, all the offspring in the first generation had smooth seeds. The wrinkled seed trait seemed to have disappeared entirely. However, when Gregor allowed these first-generation hybrids to self-pollinate, something remarkable happened in the second generation. The seemingly lost traits reappeared, but not in random proportions. Instead, they appeared in a consistent mathematical ratio of approximately 3 plants showing the dominant trait to every 1 plant showing the recessive trait. This 3-to-1 ratio appeared consistently across all 7 traits he studied. Whether he was looking at seed color, plant height, or flower position, the same mathematical pattern emerged. For a mind trained in mathematics and physics, this consistency suggested that inheritance followed specific, predictable laws. When Gregor conducted more complex experiments involving 2 traits simultaneously, he discovered even more fascinating patterns. These dihybrid crosses produced offspring in a 9-to-3-to-3-to-1 ratio, with 9 plants showing both dominant traits, 3 showing one dominant and one recessive, 3 showing the complementary combination, and 1 showing both recessive traits. These mathematical patterns revealed something profound about the nature of inheritance. Rather than being a simple blending of parental characteristics, inheritance appeared to involve discrete factors that maintained their identity across generations. These factors, which Gregor called elements and we now call genes, could be combined in predictable ways. The implications of these discoveries were staggering. They suggested that the characteristics of living organisms were governed by mathematical laws as precise as those governing the movement of planets or the behavior of physical forces. For the first time in history, the mystery of heredity could be understood through systematic observation and mathematical analysis. Chapter 9. The Laws of Life. Based on his 8 years of careful experimentation and mathematical analysis, Brother Gregor formulated 3 fundamental principles that would later be known as Mendel's laws of inheritance. These laws represented humanity's first scientific understanding of how traits pass from parents to offspring. The first law, which Gregor called the law of segregation, stated that each individual organism possesses 2 factors for each trait, one inherited from each parent. During reproduction, these factors separate so that each reproductive cell carries only one factor for each trait. When reproduction occurs, the offspring receives one factor from each parent, restoring the pair. The second law, the law of independent assortment, described how different traits are inherited independently of one another. This meant that the inheritance of seed color, for example, did not influence the inheritance of plant height. Each trait followed its own pattern according to the mathematical ratios Gregor had discovered. The third law, the law of dominance, explained why certain traits appeared in the first generation while others remained hidden. Some factors were dominant and would be expressed whenever they were present, while others were recessive and would only be expressed when both factors for that trait were recessive. These laws provided a complete framework for understanding inheritance. They explained not only Gregor's experimental results, but also patterns that farmers and breeders had observed for centuries without understanding. The mathematical precision of these laws elevated the study of inheritance from folklore and tradition to rigorous science. Gregor's approach was revolutionary not just for its conclusions, but for its methodology. He was among the first scientists to apply statistical analysis to biological problems. His careful counting and mathematical analysis transformed biology from a purely descriptive science into one that could make precise predictions. Chapter 10. Sharing the Discovery. In February and March of 1865, Brother Gregor presented his findings to the Natural History Society of Brno. Over 2 evening meetings, he shared the results of his 8 years of experimentation with an audience of fellow scientists and intellectuals. The presentation, titled Experiments on Plant Hybridization, was methodical and comprehensive. Gregor walked his audience through his experimental design, his observations, and his mathematical analysis. He explained how his results led to the 3 laws of inheritance and discussed their implications for understanding heredity in all living organisms. The immediate response to Gregor's presentation was polite but lukewarm. His audience, consisting primarily of botanists and naturalists who were accustomed to descriptive rather than mathematical approaches to biology, struggled to grasp the significance of his discoveries. The mathematical nature of his analysis was foreign to most biologists of the time. In 1866, Gregor's paper was published in the Proceedings of the Natural History Society of Brno. Understanding the importance of sharing his work with the broader scientific community, he ordered 40 reprints of the paper and sent them to prominent scientists throughout Europe. He also distributed copies to 133 scientific societies, prestigious libraries, and individual researchers. Despite these efforts, Gregor's work received little attention from the scientific community. Most scientists of the time were not prepared to accept a mathematical approach to understanding inheritance. The prevailing theories about heredity were based on the idea that parental traits blended together in offspring, and Gregor's discrete factor theory seemed too radical to accept. Some historians suggest that Gregor's work was ahead of its time in another crucial way. In 1865, scientists had not yet discovered chromosomes or understood the cellular basis of reproduction. Without this knowledge, it was difficult for his contemporaries to understand the physical basis for the factors Gregor described. Gregor himself seemed to understand that his work might not receive immediate recognition. He maintained a serene confidence that future generations would appreciate the significance of his discoveries. Just before his death, he reportedly said, "My scientific labors have brought me a great deal of satisfaction, and I am convinced that before long the entire world will praise the result of these labors." Chapter 11. The Abbot's Burden. In 1868, Brother Gregor's life took a significant turn when he was elected abbot of the monastery. This honor represented recognition of his contributions to the religious community and his leadership abilities. However, the position also brought administrative responsibilities that would gradually pull him away from his scientific work. As abbot, Gregor became not just the spiritual leader of the monastery, but also its chief administrator. The monastery was a wealthy institution with extensive agricultural holdings throughout the region. Managing these properties, overseeing the financial affairs of the community, and representing the monastery in civic matters required enormous amounts of time and energy. Gregor approached his new responsibilities with the same dedication he had brought to his scientific work. He proved to be an effective administrator who managed the monastery's affairs with wisdom and care. However, the demanding nature of these duties left him little time for the research that had brought him such satisfaction. The last decade of Gregor's life was also marked by a prolonged and bitter dispute with civil authorities over taxation of monastery property. As abbot, Gregor found himself at the center of a complex legal battle that required his constant attention. The stress of this conflict took a toll on his health and further limited his ability to pursue scientific work. Despite these challenges, Gregor maintained his interest in scientific matters. He continued his meteorological observations and his work with bees until late in his life. His apiary remained one of the most advanced in the region, and he was widely recognized as an expert beekeeper. Gregor also maintained correspondence with scientists who shared his interests. Although his own research had largely ceased, he followed developments in botany and natural science with keen interest. He remained hopeful that future researchers would build upon the foundation he had laid. Chapter 12. The Quiet End. As the 1870s progressed, the administrative burdens of being abbot, combined with the ongoing legal disputes and the natural effects of aging, began to affect Gregor's health. He suffered from kidney problems and other ailments that limited his activities. Despite his declining health, Gregor continued to fulfill his duties as abbot with characteristic dedication. He maintained his daily routines, including his meteorological observations and the care of his beloved bees. Even as his strength waned, he found peace in these gentle pursuits that connected him to the natural world he had studied so devotedly. On January 6, 1884, Gregor Johann Mendel died peacefully at the age of 61. His death marked the end of a life dedicated to understanding the mysteries of nature and serving his religious community. 3 days later, he was buried in the Central Cemetery in Brno. His funeral attended by the friars of his monastery and members of the local community who had known him as a teacher, administrator, and kind man. In the obituaries published at the time of his death, Gregor was remembered primarily as an excellent teacher, a dedicated abbot, and above all, as an expert beekeeper. The local newspapers described him as one of the most experienced beekeepers in Moravia and praised his innovations in bee breeding. His groundbreaking work on inheritance was barely mentioned. Following Gregor's death, the new abbot of the monastery, Anselm Rambowsek, ordered that most of Gregor's personal papers be burned. This tragic decision destroyed potentially dozens of scientific papers and research notes that might have provided insights into other discoveries Gregor had made. Only the published paper on pea plant hybridization survived to carry his scientific legacy forward. Chapter 13. The Rediscovery. For 16 years after Gregor's death, his scientific work remained virtually unknown to the world. His paper on plant hybridization gathered dust in libraries, occasionally read by researchers but not understood or appreciated. The scientific community was not yet ready to embrace the mathematical approach to biology that Gregor had pioneered. However, as the 19th century drew to a close, the scientific understanding of cells and reproduction had advanced considerably. Scientists had discovered chromosomes and begun to understand their role in inheritance. This new knowledge provided the context needed to appreciate the significance of Gregor's work. In 1900, something remarkable happened. Three different scientists, working independently in different countries, conducted their own experiments on plant inheritance and reached conclusions remarkably similar to those Gregor had published 34 years earlier. Hugo de Vries in the Netherlands, Karl Correns in Germany, and Erich von T. Schermack in Austria each discovered patterns of inheritance that matched the mathematical ratios Gregor had described. When they searched the scientific literature before publishing their results, they were amazed to discover Gregor's 1866 paper. Each of these scientists generously acknowledged that Gregor had preceded them in discovering the laws of inheritance. De Vries, Correns, and T. Schermack became known as the rediscoverers of Mendel's work, and their recognition finally brought Gregor the scientific acknowledgement he deserved. The rediscovery of Gregor's work came at a time when the scientific community was ready to appreciate its significance. The field of genetics was born as scientists began building upon the foundation Gregor had laid. His three laws became the cornerstone of the new science, and researchers around the world began conducting experiments based on his methods. Chapter 14: The Growing Legacy. Following the rediscovery of his work in 1900, Gregor's reputation grew rapidly throughout the scientific community. What had once been an obscure paper by an unknown monk became recognized as one of the most important scientific documents ever written. Scientists began to realize that Gregor's laws applied not just to pea plants, but to all living organisms. The patterns he had discovered in his monastery garden governed inheritance in animals, plants, and even humans. Medical researchers found that many human diseases followed the same mathematical patterns Gregor had observed in his peas. The development of new technologies allowed scientists to see the physical basis for Gregor's factors. The discovery of DNA and the understanding of how genes work at the molecular level confirmed the accuracy of his insights. Every new discovery seemed to validate and extend the principles he had established. Gregor's mathematical approach to biology also inspired researchers in other fields. His use of statistical analysis became a standard tool in biological research. The careful experimental design he pioneered became the model for scientific investigation. As the 20th century progressed, practical applications of Gregor's discoveries transformed agriculture and medicine. Plant breeders used his principles to develop new crop varieties with improved yields and disease resistance. Medical researchers applied his laws to understand and treat genetic diseases. The field of genetics, founded on Gregor's work, became one of the most dynamic and important areas of scientific research. From understanding evolution to developing new medical treatments, virtually every advance in biology built upon the foundation he had laid. Chapter 15: Modern Genetics. Today, more than 150 years after Gregor began his experiments, his influence on science continues to grow. The Human Genome Project, which mapped all human genes, was a direct descendant of the work he began in his monastery garden. Modern genetic engineering techniques, from developing new medicines to creating improved crops, all rely on the principles he discovered. Perhaps if you were to pause here and consider subscribing to our channel, you would join thousands of others who find peace and knowledge in these gentle explorations of remarkable lives. Your support helps us continue sharing these stories of human curiosity and dedication. The study of genetics has revealed that Gregor's insights were even more profound than he could have imagined. Scientists have discovered that the same basic principles that govern inheritance in pea plants also control the development of complex organisms, from the formation of organs to the functioning of the nervous system. Modern medicine has been revolutionized by applications of Gregor's discoveries. Genetic counselors help families understand the inheritance patterns of diseases. Gene therapy offers hope for treating previously incurable conditions. Personalized medicine uses genetic information to tailor treatments to individual patients. Agricultural science has been equally transformed. Plant breeders use sophisticated versions of Gregor's methods to develop crops that can feed a growing world population. Understanding of inheritance has led to varieties resistant to diseases, tolerant of harsh environmental conditions, and enhanced in nutritional value. The environmental applications of genetics are also expanding rapidly. Scientists use genetic techniques to study biodiversity, track endangered species, and understand how organisms adapt to changing conditions. This knowledge is crucial for conservation efforts and environmental protection. Chapter 16: The Eternal Garden. As we reflect on the life of Gregor Johann Mendel, we see a man whose quiet dedication to understanding the natural world changed the course of human knowledge. From his humble beginnings on a farm in Moravian Silesia to his groundbreaking discoveries in a monastery garden, his journey exemplifies the power of careful observation, patient experimentation, and mathematical thinking. Gregor's life teaches us that scientific breakthroughs often come not from dramatic moments of inspiration, but from years of methodical work and careful analysis. His willingness to count thousands of pea plants, to maintain meticulous records, and to look for mathematical patterns in biological phenomena exemplified the kind of disciplined thinking that advances human understanding. The challenges Gregor faced, from financial hardship in his youth to the administrative burdens of his later years, remind us that scientific progress often requires personal sacrifice. His sister Verja's gift of her dowry, his years of struggling with anxiety and depression, and his gradual abandonment of research for administrative duties all speak to the human cost of discovery. Yet Gregor's serenity in the face of initial neglect of his work demonstrates a kind of faith in the ultimate value of truth. He trusted that future generations would recognize the importance of his discoveries, and his confidence was ultimately vindicated. The monastery garden where Gregor conducted his experiments has become a symbol of the peaceful pursuit of knowledge. Today, visitors can walk through reconstructed gardens and greenhouses built on the foundations of the original facilities. Pea plants still grow there, living symbols of the discoveries that emerged from that peaceful space. Chapter 17. Lessons from the Garden. The story of Gregor Mendel offers profound lessons about the nature of scientific discovery and the qualities required for breakthrough thinking. His approach combined several elements that made his success possible. First was his choice of the right experimental system. Pea plants proved ideal for studying inheritance because they had clear, distinct traits that could be easily observed and counted. This choice was not accidental, but reflected careful thought about what kind of organism would best reveal the patterns he sought to understand. Second was his mathematical approach to biological problems. While his contemporaries were content with qualitative descriptions of inheritance, Gregor insisted on counting and measuring. This quantitative approach revealed patterns that would have remained invisible to purely descriptive methods. Third was his patience and persistence. 8 years of careful experimentation, involving 28,000 plants, required extraordinary dedication. Lesser scientists might have drawn conclusions from smaller samples or shorter studies, missing the clear patterns that emerged only from comprehensive analysis. Fourth was his willingness to challenge accepted wisdom. The prevailing theory of blended inheritance seemed obvious and had been accepted for centuries. Gregor's discoveries contradicted this theory, but he followed his evidence rather than accepted doctrine. Perhaps, if you would take a moment to share in the comments below one insight from Gregor's life that resonates with you, you would help create a community of reflection around these timeless stories of human achievement. Chapter 18. The Continuing Revolution. The revolution that Gregor began in his monastery garden continues to unfold in ways he could never have imagined. Each new technology and discovery builds upon the foundation he established, revealing new layers of complexity and beauty in the mechanisms of inheritance. Modern genetic research has revealed that inheritance is far more complex than even Gregor suspected. Scientists have discovered that genes can be turned on and off by environmental factors, that some traits are influenced by hundreds of different genes, and that inheritance can be modified by chemical changes that don't alter the DNA itself. Yet through all these discoveries, Gregor's basic insights remain valid. The principle that inheritance involves discrete factors passed from parents to offspring, the mathematical patterns of dominant and recessive traits, and the independent assortment of different characteristics all continue to provide the framework for understanding heredity. The tools available to modern geneticists would seem magical to Gregor. Scientists can now read the complete genetic code of any organism, edit genes with precision, and even create entirely new genetic combinations. Yet all of these techniques depend on the principles he discovered through patient observation of pea plants. Perhaps most remarkably, modern research has revealed that the same genetic mechanisms Gregor studied operate throughout the living world. From the smallest bacteria to the largest mammals, from simple plants to complex ecosystems, the laws of inheritance he discovered provide a unifying framework for understanding all life. Chapter 19. A Life of Quiet Service. While Gregor's scientific achievements rightly dominate discussions of his legacy, his life exemplified other virtues that deserve recognition. Throughout his career, he served his religious community with dedication and humility. As a teacher, Gregor was beloved by his students for his patience, kindness, and ability to make complex subjects understandable. Even without formal certification, he was recognized as one of the finest educators in the region. His commitment to helping young minds understand the natural world reflected his deep belief in the value of knowledge and education. As abbot, Gregor administered the monastery's affairs with wisdom and integrity. He managed the institution's considerable wealth responsibly, maintained good relationships with the broader community, and provided leadership during challenging times. Even when legal disputes created stress and controversy, he handled these difficulties with grace and determination. Throughout his life, Gregor maintained his connection to the agricultural world of his childhood. His work with bees, his care of the monastery gardens, and his meteorological observations all reflected a deep appreciation for the natural world and the cycles of growth and change that govern all life. Perhaps most admirably, Gregor never allowed the lack of recognition for his scientific work to embitter him. He continued his research for the joy of discovery itself, confident that truth would eventually be recognized and appreciated. This serene acceptance of delayed recognition speaks to a character of remarkable maturity and faith. Chapter 20. The Timeless Questions. Gregor's research addressed fundamental questions that have fascinated humans throughout history. Why do children resemble their parents? How are traits passed from one generation to the next? What determines the characteristics that make each individual unique? Before Gregor's work, these questions could only be answered with folklore, tradition, or speculation. Farmers and breeders had practical knowledge about inheritance, but they lacked a scientific framework for understanding the underlying mechanisms. Gregor's experiments provided the first systematic answers to these ancient questions. His discoveries revealed that inheritance follows precise mathematical laws, as predictable as the movements of planets or the behavior of physical forces. This insight transformed biology from a descriptive science into one capable of making precise predictions about natural phenomena. The implications of this transformation extend far beyond biology itself. Gregor's work demonstrated that even the most complex and mysterious aspects of life could be understood through careful observation and mathematical analysis. This realization helped establish the modern scientific worldview that natural phenomena can be explained through systematic investigation. Moreover, Gregor's approach showed that individual researchers, working with simple tools and careful methods, could make discoveries of fundamental importance. His monastery garden became a symbol of how scientific progress can emerge from the most humble circumstances when guided by curiosity, patience, and rigorous thinking. Chapter 21. The Garden Eternal. Today, when we walk through any garden or observe any family, we see the silent operation of the laws Gregor discovered. The red tulips that return each spring, the blue eyes that appear in a newborn child, the sweet corn that feeds millions of people, all reflect the mathematical patterns he first observed in his pea plants. Modern genetics has revealed the breathtaking complexity underlying these seemingly simple patterns. Each cell in every organism contains instructions written in a genetic code more complex than any library. Yet this vast information system operates according to the basic principles Gregor elucidated. The beauty of Gregor's discovery lies not just in its scientific importance, but in its demonstration of the underlying order and logic of the natural world. What might appear to be random variation in living things actually follows precise mathematical rules that can be understood and predicted. This revelation offers a kind of comfort and wonder that extends beyond its practical applications. It suggests that beneath the apparent chaos and complexity of life lies a beautiful mathematical structure that connects all living things through shared principles of inheritance. In understanding these principles, we gain not just scientific knowledge, but a deeper appreciation for our place in the web of life. The same laws that govern the inheritance of pea plant characteristics also govern our own traits and connect us to all other living organisms. Before we conclude this gentle journey through Gregor's remarkable life, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your engagement helps us continue creating these peaceful explorations of extraordinary lives and important ideas. Chapter 22. The Living Legacy. As Gregor's story draws to a close, we find that in many ways it has no ending. Every day, researchers around the world build upon the foundation he laid, extending our understanding of inheritance and applying his insights to new challenges. Medical researchers use Gregor's principles to develop treatments for genetic diseases that were incurable in his time. Agricultural scientists apply his methods to create crops that can help feed a growing world population. Environmental biologists use genetic techniques to understand and protect the diversity of life on Earth. Perhaps most importantly, educators around the world introduce new generations of students to the wonder of genetics through the same pea plant experiments that Gregor conducted over 150 years ago. These simple demonstrations continue to reveal the elegant mathematical patterns underlying all inheritance. In this way, Gregor's monastery garden continues to bloom in classrooms, laboratories, and research facilities throughout the world. Each new discovery, each successful application of genetic principles, each moment of understanding when a student grasps the beauty of Mendel's laws represents a continuation of the work he began in his peaceful corner of Moravia. The peaceful setting where Gregor made his discoveries reminds us that some of the most profound advances in human knowledge emerge not from grand institutions or dramatic moments, but from quiet spaces where patient observers can study the natural world with care and attention. As we reach the end of our journey through the life of Gregor Johann Mendel, we are left with a profound appreciation for the power of patient observation, mathematical thinking, and quiet dedication to truth. His story teaches us that scientific breakthroughs often emerge not from moments of brilliant inspiration, but from years of careful work and methodical analysis. Gregor's life demonstrates how intellectual curiosity, nurtured in the right environment and guided by rigorous methods, can unlock secrets that transform our understanding of the world. His monastery garden became a place where the ancient mysteries of inheritance finally yielded to systematic investigation. The qualities that made Gregor's success possible, patience, precision, mathematical thinking, and faith in the ultimate recognition of truth, remain as relevant today as they were in his time. His example continues to inspire researchers who seek to understand the natural world through careful observation and rigorous analysis. Perhaps most importantly, Gregor's story reminds us that the most profound discoveries often come from the most humble circumstances. A monk in a monastery garden, working with simple pea plants and basic tools, managed to revolutionize biology and lay the foundation for modern genetics. As you rest tonight, may you find peace in the knowledge that the natural world, despite its apparent complexity, operates according to beautiful mathematical principles that connect all living things. May Gregor's example of patient curiosity and quiet dedication inspire your own pursuit of understanding and growth. And may the gentle rhythms of his monastery garden bring you the same tranquil satisfaction that comes from contemplating the elegant order underlying all life. In the end, Gregor Johann Mendel's greatest legacy may not be the specific laws he discovered, but the demonstration that careful thinking and patient observation can reveal the deepest secrets of existence. His peaceful garden continues to bloom in every laboratory, every classroom, and every moment when human curiosity encounters the beautiful complexity of the living world. Sweet dreams, and may your rest be as peaceful as a monastery garden, where pea plants grow according to the eternal laws of inheritance, connecting you to all the life that came before and all that will come after.